Today on Low Effort Warhammer Lore, we're going to be taking a look at Vampire Counts, the 6th edition codex. This is the first codex I ever owned. It is my favorite codex. I know a lot of people feel the same way, that this was one of, if not the best, of the 6th edition codexes, and it made a lasting impression on a lot of people. I feel like a lot of people started playing in 6th edition, and a lot of people ended up choosing Vampire Count. So this happened to be their first book. So I got this in the early 2000s. It was my first army I collected right before I started collecting Beasts of Chaos. And, I'm going to take some quick time to just review the book with you and show you a little bit of the lore and the rules. Um, so far, I haven't had any type of copyright issue. I'm not going to show everything just to avoid any potential copyright problems. If one ever does come up, I'll just chop up my footage and, re-upload the video. So let's start by taking a look at the cover. We got a what looks like a blood dragon, which is one of the vampire bloodlines. Very cool piece of artwork. It's nice to see it colorized. It's one of the. I feel like this is one of the more known pieces of Vampire Counts artwork. I prefer this compared to the 7th edition Codex art. It just looks more realistic to me. Very cool looking, very gritty and dark. A lot of greens. And we're gonna take a look inside right now. So, right off the bat, we get this massive display piece from Games Day 1999, which has apparently over 2,000 zombies were assembled and painted for this display piece, which is takes a lot of time if you ever put together the old zombies and painted them. Very cool display piece. This is one of the first things I saw when opening this book as a kid, and it instantly got me wanting to uh, play and collect Warhammer, play Vampire Counts. It was a real great first impression into the hobby, seeing what these people can do with time and patience, and it's just a great display piece. It's a shame I was too young at the time to be able to actually go and check it out. And then on the opposite page, we get what looks to be a necromancer there in the back, summoning some type of undead from a graveyard. Very cool looking artwork. Fits right in with the rest of the art for this codex. It's all the artwork's phenomenal. Very cool looking stuff. This was done by A. Smith. Very cool stuff. 6th edition had my favorite artwork out of any edition of Warhammer or 40K. And, it may just be nostalgia or looking back at it, but I just still really enjoy the art. So, moving on, we get our introduction, and this just tells us what we're going to see in this book. This codex is set up the exact same way as the current codexes, where you get like the army lore in the beginning, followed by some lore for each unit, like each sculpt gets its background lore. Then in the middle of the book, you get like the pictures and the how to paint, and then at the end of the book, you get the rules for playing games. It's the same way. It's been this way for 2 decades. Until codexes go digital, I'd assume it will continue being this way for a long time. So, moving on, we jump into the first bit of lore of, now I'm probably saying this wrong, but Lamia. And, to just brief you on the vampire bloodlines, there's 5 of them. They act like mini factions within the Vampire Counts faction, very similar to the current Age of Sigmar Codex, where you will have like Legion of Blood or Legion of Night, so on and so forth. This is the same idea. It's just called Bloodlines in this instance, and each vampire from your army had to follow that particular bloodline you chose. So if you chose Von Karstein, they'd all have to be Von Karstein. So to start off with the lore, Lamia, which again I'm probably saying wrong, it was the first city of vampires to kind of condense everything and briefly explain it. The necromancer Nagash taught the Queen of Lamia about necromancy. She became a vampire. Some other things happened in between, but she became the first vampire. She turned some of her like generals and other kings into vampires, which became the first von Karsteins or blood dragons or so on and so forth. A lot of bad stuff happened. They got kicked out of their homeland. They got displaced to the rest of the old world, and so on and so forth. So to kind of go into Lamia, they're the female vampires. I know that's probably a bad explanation, but that's what they are. They have powers of like mind control and stuff like that. A lot of like leadership checks and just kind of like funky rules. I never played them. The models were very cool, but yeah, I didn't have much interest in them as a kid. I preferred the what were they? The Neckarchs, which are like the Frankenstein vampires. But regardless, Lamia, very cool lore. They were the first vampires. Today they would be Legion of Blood. I think they even still have the Queen as a model. I can't pronounce her name. It's I'd get it wrong, but she is currently in 40K as a usable model today. So they get kicked out of their homeland. They lose their kingdom, and the Lamias end up being like the nobility in the empire. They kind of hide in plain sight. That's their thing. They're female vampires. Moving on. Here we go. We get some a picture of one right over here. Very cool looking artwork. Again, all the artwork is great from this entire codex. The artwork is completely on point. Very cool stuff. All right. Next up, we got the von Karsteins. These are the typical, what you would think of when you hear the word vampire counts, like the Bela Lugosi vampires, the Draculas, and they just kind of look like what you'd expect a vampire to look like. That's their that's their whole thing. They can do stuff. They could summon wolves and dire wolves and bats, and they live in castles compared to the other vampires. They're just very like what you would consider or imagine a vampire count to be and act like. Very cool piece of lore over here. A note which is from a witch hunter who encountered some von Karsteins. Obviously, it didn't go well from him because we see the blood up here. Cool bit of lore. Moving on. We get some artwork over here which shows the lands of the empire, and each of those stakes represents a territory controlled by a vampire lord or a bloodline of vampires. So the skulls would be Neckarchs, which I'm probably saying wrong. I always called them Necras just because I was young and didn't know how to pronounce things. The dragons would be blood dragons. The ones with bats on them would be Strigai. The ones with the wolves would be von Karsteins, and the snakes would be Lamia. So this just shows, which vampire clan controls which part of the empire, so on and so forth. Very cool bit of lore. We got some cool pictures over here. Moving on. Blood dragons. These are, warrior vampires. That, I'm not going to go much more into them. That's what they are. Nice and simple. They're like knights, vampire knights. And we get some cool lore over here depicting a Bretonnian who ran into one of these. Obviously, it didn't go that well for him. But cool stuff. Cool bit of lore. These were a lot of people's favorites back in the day just because they were very powerful on the tabletop. You could make some really strong lords and heroes with blood dragons. So, next up, Necrarchs. Necrarchs. I'd always call them Necras again just because I was a kid. Couldn't pronounce things right. These are like your wizard vampires, your Frankenstein monster vampires. They're kind of what the Avangori would be today. These are the faction I played. Very cool scopes. I will, when this video is getting to the end, I'll pull out some of my models to kind of show you them. Awesome lore. They were, wizard vampires. They just wanted everyone to be killed. That was their thing. They didn't really do much with they didn't. Yeah, that was it. They were just evil vampire wizards, which was what every 11-year-old kind of wanted to play as. So here is some artwork from them showing a ferry being operated on. They would kind of do like mad science type stuff. Very cool artwork again. And then finally, we have the Strigoi. Probably saying that wrong, but this is the faction that would become Ghoul Kings. They decided to split the book up into when Age of Sigmar happened. This book actually got split into 3 different factions: Vampire Counts, which I think were called something else at the beginning of Age of Sigmar, Ghoul Kings, and then Nighthaunt. All kind of came from this book. It was got split into 3 different ones for some reason. I'm sure there was a good reason behind it, but yeah, that's what happened. So Strigoi got their own faction. They became Ghoul Kings. The lore is very similar. In this book, their backstory was that they were betrayed by the other vampire counts. They had to end up eating out of graveyards because they got hunted by all the other bloodlines, and a similar tragic backstory to the Ghoul Kings. Very cool faction. They're kind of like more animal like. They have ghouls that flock towards them, and you get the idea. Very cool artwork right here showing a Ghoul King. Cool stuff. Next up. Oh, this is actually one of my favorite bits of lore. This shows a story about the Skaven coming across one of these Ghoul Kings, and they get absolutely wrecked by the Ghoul King. Very cool stuff. You could probably find this online in like a PDF. Cool little story. All right, so second part of the book. This is where they cover each unit's lore. I'm not gonna spend that much time here, just because I don't want to show everything in the book. But you got vampires, which are obviously from one of the bloodlines. Then you got your necromancers, which their job is to summon the army of the undead for the vampires. Vampires can do it too, but necromancers, it's their only job. Like, they're just wizards who can summon undead to fight for the vampires. One of the rules here was that a wizard had to be your general. So, you had to have either a necromancer or a vampire count or lord as your general for the army. And if that general got destroyed in any way, your army would fall apart pretty quickly. They'd have to take they'd have to take checks, which would really amount to a significant amount of your models would be destroyed each turn if the general got killed. So it's very important to keep them alive. Another big rule for this army was fear. Back in 6th edition, fear was a very powerful rule, which only certain units had. There was fear and terror. Both of them did different things. But one of the powerful things of vampire counts was that almost every unit caused fear. So really, if your units were not that great, like zombies or skeletons who could barely, really do combat well, it was okay because they'd be causing fear, which would, amount to your enemy losing models anyway. So here we got some of the basic undead troops: skeletons, zombies, ghouls, so on and so forth. Some cool artwork down here. Over next page, these are your ethereal, your your ghosts, pretty much. Your spirits. Sorry, I'm having trouble with words today. All of these actually became their own faction. They became night haunts, like banshees, spirit hosts, wraiths. This was originally part of Vampire Counts, but just like with Ghoul Kings, they split it into a different book. So, same with the next page with the Black Coach over here. I think the Black Coach ended up with Night Haunts, and yeah, so on and so forth. It was nice to be able to play with all of these in one book. So here are the Shades of Death, which is the middle of the book, which shows you the models, the most important part in my mind. And this shows some pretty cool stuff here. We got how to paint your zombies over here, some skeletons, some conversions over here, converting undead regiments, which was the whole point of this faction pretty much. You were going to, be adding your own things to it. And, a lot of cool work here. This was, like I said, 2 decades ago, and the models look great. The conversions look great. Cool stuff. Let me show you some of the bloodlines. Here we have the faction I played, the Neckarchs. Or again, I'm probably saying that wrong. Like I said, I always called them Necras just because, an 11-year-old can't really pronounce things that doesn't have the best reading skills. So, Neckarchs or Necras is what I'd always call them. But this is what I played. That big model is Zacchaeus the Ever Living, which was, I think, maybe one of the most expensive Games Workshop models point wise. He was like 1,000 something points to field in an army, which means like you would never take him, but very cool nonetheless. Over here we got some blood dragons, which were your knight vampire knights. Very cool. And then here we have Lamia, von Karsteins, and the Ghoul Kings, which I explained a little bit earlier what each of those are. Over here we have the old Black Coach. Still an awesome model. You can see the little vampire in him, because the coach would, the more it would damage it caused, it would eventually supposed to resurrect this little vampire guy, and that would ride in the back of it. So moving on. Minions of the Undead. This just shows some army setup. As you can see here, we got on the bottom that spirit host. Let me try to get it closer. I think this is made with some old Empire models that were converted. Looks pretty good. Then we have a big picture here of the armies kind of squaring up against each other. We got Empire on the bottom, Vampire Counts on the top. All right, I'm going to skip ahead a bunch. Unholy artifacts. Actually, you can still see the marks from when I was a kid writing in this book. The book is in pretty bad shape. It's all drawn all over just because I've had it for years. But this would, the same as today, artifacts. Back at this time, you would pay points for each artifact. So, you really had to think carefully about what you wanted to take. Like, paying 100 points for the Frostblade would be like, pretty expensive as far as army composition. But a lot of cool artifacts here. Again, a lot of cool stuff. Just artifacts. I'm not really going to go into them that much. Then we get to Bloodlines. So this is one of the most important parts of building a 6th edition Vampire Counts army. Is the bloodlines, because it really determines how you build your entire army. So as you see, they get bonuses, like passive bonuses here. Von Karstein, let me try to zoom in. Sorry, I'm still not using the best camera, but that will improve once I get better at these videos. So Von Karstein is like the normal type. They don't get any pluses or minuses. Blood Dragon get +2 to their weapon skill. Strygai get a ward save, and so on and so forth. So each of them, get their own strengths and weaknesses, which are like passive skills. Then over here, each bloodline also gets their own abilities, which are unique to each bloodline. So Von Karstein, for 65 points, they can summon bats, which, it's pretty much each bloodline gets something like this. So Blood Dragon, it's all going to be stuff to build up your combat lords, which giving them plus attack or ward saves or so on and so forth. So again, all your vampires from your army had to be from the same bloodline. So this was just ways to add abilities to your lords and heroes more than they already would have besides the artifacts. So moving on, I'll show you some more artwork. The Lamias have some cool abilities. They can seduction, domination, transfix. They can like control other models, mind control stuff. Very cool artwork right there. So moving on, the Black Arts. This was the necromancy discipline, which was, I think, probably the strongest in 6th edition, because you could really do some wacky stuff with this as far as like, summoning entire units at a, let's see here, 3d6 plus 3 zombies, and then there was ways to even make that more, like to add on to that with certain units, and you could really do some crazy stuff. Hellish Vigor, uh just a lot of spells. Like the undead units were pretty bad, but with this magic discipline you can make them really good, just to simplify everything. So army composition, pretty straightforward, nothing special here. Last week I did Beast of Chaos, which had a nightmare army composition because, they were pretty much 3 different books, Warriors of Chaos, Demons, and Beast of Chaos. It made it combining them really, really kind of like convoluted and not that simple to do. This straightforward, you're just playing vampire counts, normal army composition. All right, and then on to the units. So the Vampire Lord and Count are, and I could be wrong here, but I think they are probably the strongest units in 6th edition. Vampire Lord in particular is the amount of buffs you could stack on this Vampire Lord back in the day were pretty ridiculous. At some point I'll upload a video just showing a scenario of like one of the units you could make, but just it was, you could. So the Vampire Lord here, they have the normal stuff you could buy for him, like make him a level 3 wizard for 50 plus 50 points. Then you can get him 100 points worth of artifacts, which were your magic items. And then on top of that, you could also get vampiric powers. You could spend that 100 points on vampire powers too, the bloodline powers, and you end up with like some pretty like ridiculously silly characters that I don't think anyone could really deal with on the tabletop. Very unbalanced, in my opinion, if you were to compare it to today's rules, but really fun to play. So your lords and heroes, you got your master necromancer down here, and then your basic heroes like wraith necromancer, vampire thrall, just like your lesser heroes. Still really cool. So core units are, like your troops, which if you were to compare it to 40k today, ghouls, zombies, skeletons, bat, swarm, and dire wolves. Pretty simple. They're all terrible, but they, for the most part, they can be revived, the skeleton and zombies. So you would end up with really cheap units that would be destroyed easy, but you could bring back entire units of them each turn, multiple times if you wanted to. So then you get on to special units, which would be, your Grave Guard, your Black Knights, Fellbats, and Spirit Hosts. These were exactly what they sound, special units. They were more expensive, but compared to other 6th edition armies, these were still dirt cheap. And they were pretty good. They had Killing Blow special rules as far as the Grave Guard and Black Knights. And the Spirit Hosts just could not be hurt by anything besides magic. The ethereal rule meant that like nothing would hurt them. Only magic weapons or magic spells. So you could kind of use them to block entire units or tie them up. So moving on, some cool artwork here. It's really, I really suggest trying to buy this book if you could find it, because it's great. I can't really do it justice showing you it so briefly, but it's completely packed with lore, and it's fun rule wise. So rare units, you got your Banshee and your Black Coach, which Black Coach is like a centerpiece model, very powerful, and then you have your Banshees, which were also very powerful. They would, I think, do what they still do today, where they'd like do mortal wounds on leadership checks. Over here we have, okay, so this is pretty much like where they put the squatted units that didn't make it into the codex, but that used to have models, and a lot of these end up coming back. Like the Vampire Queen ends up, she's in Age of Sigmar now, but you know, just some cool lore pieces. So then, towards the end of the book, we have our two special heroes, which were both ridiculously expensive point-wise. We have the Von Karstein, who, let me zoom in a bit, ends up being 700 points, very expensive point-wise. You know, total monster as far as rules. He has a 3+ ward save, can cast a bunch of spells, level 4 wizard, very powerful. He can totally do work on the tabletop. Very hard unit to get rid of. Over here we have some awesome artwork of him. There he is. Let's get it. There he is with a bunch of undead. Yeah, I'm kind of leaving the camera a little bit blurry to try to avoid any copyright issues. Like I said, we'll see what happens. So there he is with outside his castle, just doing vampire count stuff. Then on the next page, we get, without a doubt, I think the most expensive unit in 6th edition, Zacharias the Ever Living, who is 1,015 points. I think that's actually more than Nagash is currently, and he's like Nagash, but more powerful rule wise. He can cast a ridiculous amount of spells. He can cast his resurrection spell on a 15+ to return 4d6 skeletons or 4d6 plus 4 zombies, which at the time is that is a ton of models to return, you know, to units or just start new units with. He could just kind of pop them up in the middle of the battlefield and do a bunch of wacky stuff with it. He gets pluses to, he gets all 6 of the bloodline powers of his bloodline. He has a 4+ ward save. He's just a very, very powerful unit, but you know, he, in a 2,000 point game, he's more than half your entire army is him. He has a zombie dragon. There's his stats. And yeah, overall, just a very, very cool unit. He had a really cool sculpt. I don't know if you could still find it today on eBay. I'm sure there are a few of them. But yeah, awesome model. He was my favorite model I had as a kid. Then at the back of the book, we get some cool lore showing how to hunt vampires. You know, the book, the stake and hammer, the sign of Sigmar, sacred water, the mirror, just your things to you know, to hunt vampires. I think it's like kind of subtly saying that like none of this stuff works, but cool stuff nonetheless. And then finally at the back of the book we have just like how to play this army, you know, like competitive kind of a competitive breakdown of how to get the most out of your games, how to format your army list. Cool stuff for the time. And then last but not least, sorry, my book is absolutely falling apart on me. We have our Legions of the Dead, and this is kind of how to build fluff armies. You know, it adds a few units. You couldn't really do this in match play, but it would be to build like fluffy armies. For instance, with a Necromancer's army, you could just have like what do you call it, monsters in it, zombie dragons and stuff like that. just to build your like flavorful armies. And then at the end, which I wish they still did stuff like this today, you get everything condensed down just as like a quick check sheet. I don't think the 40K codexes do this or Age of Sigmar. It was a really good idea, just because when you're playing a game, you could break this out and kind of, you know, look at what does what. At the time, there wasn't really that many rules online yet, so it was good to just have this to be able to break out and check what your unit does as opposed to having to go through the whole book and everything. So again, Vampire Count 6th edition. Um, like I said, I'm gonna get better at these reviews. I'm still very new to this. I hope this gave you a somewhat better idea of the Vampire Count 6th edition codex. It's a fun codex. I recommend it. Great artwork, nice lore, uh, great pictures inside of it. Again, I spent almost no time going into any of the actual lore of the codex. I recommend, if you can get a hold of this, to get it. It's in my opinion the best Vampire Counts codex, and in my opinion the best codex overall that Games Workshop has released. I think next week I'm going to do either the High Elves or Wood Elf Codex, the 6th edition. If you want to hear an old man ramble about a game that no longer exists, come check it out. Again, Vampire Count 6th edition Codex. I hope you enjoyed.